Jan Karon, born Janice Meredith Wilson in the foothills of North Carolina, was named after, who knows who she was named after? You'd think. Janice Meredith is actually the title of an 1899 book written by Paul Leicester Ford. It was about the American Revolution, and someone in her family must have liked that book. So that's where she got her name, Janice Meredith Wilson, from the book, 1899 title, Meredith Wilson. Her creative skills first came alive when her family moved to a farm. On the farm, there is time to muse and dream, she says. I am endlessly grateful. I was reared in the country. As a young girl, I couldn't wait to get off that farm to go to Hollywood or New York. But living in those confined, bucolic circumstances was one of the best things that ever happened to me. She actually wrote her first novel at the age of 10, and she recalls, the manuscript was written on blue horse notebook paper and was, for good reason, kept hidden from my sister. When she found it, she discovered the one curse word I had, with pounding heart, included in someone's speech. For Pete's sake, hadn't Rhett Butler used that very same word and gotten away with it after my grandmother's exceedingly focused reproof? I've written books without cussin' ever since. Miss Karon left a career in advertising to pursue writing books and moved to Blowing Rock, North Carolina. Blowing Rock is a town of about 2,000, perched at 5,000 feet in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And as many of you know, it is the model for Miss Karon's wonderfully popular Mitford series. None of the people in Mitford are actually based upon anyone in Blowing Rock, says the author. Yet the spirit of my characters is found throughout this real-life village. Enthusiastic booksellers across the country have introduced readers of all ages to Miss Karon's heartwarming books. At Home in Mitford, Karon's first book in the Mitford series, was nominated for an Abbey Award by the American Booksellers Association in '96 and again in '97. Tonight, we celebrate Jan Karon's new Father Tim novel titled Home to Holly Springs, in which Father Tim of Mitford returns to his Mississippi home to take care of some mysterious business. Other new titles from Miss Karon include the Mitford Bedside Companion and the new children's book Violet Goes to the Country. I could rattle off her titles, but you don't need that. Ladies and gentlemen, the beloved author of the heartwarming Mitford series, here to talk about her brand new title, Home to Holly Springs, and answer your questions, Jan Karon.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm honored to be here in the Carter Center. I was just thinking as we came up on the elevator, I don't believe in America we have a channel for doing this, but in England they call people a national treasure. I would like so much to see President Carter called a national treasure. He's done so much good for us since he left office. I mean, it's terrific. I'm proud also to be associated with the Margaret Mitchell House. I went by her gravesite today. It was very moving, what a gift she gave us. Before my tour arrangements were even worked out, I had started reading Gone with the Wind in its very first paperback edition in all these years. The best novel to have come out of the South, said the Washington Post. It is unsurpassed in the whole of American writing. Now, even if you already own one or two copies of GWTW, I would suggest that you buy Scribner's new paperback just for Pat Conroy's preface. He adores this book, but then who doesn't, of course? But he can really talk about how he adores it. He grew up in a household where only two books were ever on display, Gone with the Wind and the Holy Bible. Now, Margaret Mitchell's work had a huge impact on the great Pat Conroy, and so it did on me. I was 10 years old when I saw the movie, entirely alone at a Saturday matinee in Lenore, North Carolina. I was absolutely knocked winding. Its power was alarming. It was as if this movie had reached out into that little audience in that little town in North Carolina and sort of picked me out and held me captive for years. And I think maybe that's how most of us felt about that movie. But then next, and this is a lot to happen when you're 10 years old, next I read the book. Now, books were about as popular in my household as they were in Pat Conroy's, and so I often read at night under the covers with a flashlight. Now, what was I going to do? How was I going to process this complex and enormous story with its cast of hundreds? All the war and bloodshed and pillaging going on in people's lives, and petticoats and 18-inch waistlines and starvation and loss and grief. That's a lot when you're 10 years old. Well, for a while, I put pictures of Clark Gable on my wall. But that didn't really do it. It was a sort of pitiable act in the face of all that Margaret Mitchell had revealed to me. It was during this 10th year that I had an epiphany. It was made known to me that I was going to be an author. I remember it so clearly as if it could have been last week. I was standing at my grandmother's. My sister and I were raised by my grandparents. I was standing at my grandmother's front door, and I was just looking out. There was nothing in particular on my mind, and I just had this wonderfully filling sense that I was going to be an author. Now, I held that in high esteem, because my little sister and I played author, the game of author. You know those cards? Anybody here my age? Author cards. Anyway, all these lovely authors. And, of course, then that's what Miss Mitchell had done. So I wanted to be like them, and I was thrilled. So for the first time, I visited a public library, 10 years old. I'd gone with my grandfather to his barber shop on a Saturday and asked if I could walk up to the library. Now, we were a country family, and I had never crossed a town street, and I was kind of scared. And my grandfather wasn't too sure about it either. But there I went, lickety-split, 2 blocks up a hill, then up the steps and into a vast room where everybody was whispering. I'd never seen anything like that. I was shy, and I was frightened, and I was thrilled, and I was thunderstruck all at once. I just froze to the spot. All those books, where to begin? Well, a librarian saw my trepidation, and she said these beautiful words to me. Lorna Doone, girl of the Limberlost. Wow. Are there any librarians here? I just love librarians, and I want to thank you. So I tucked those 2 books under my arm, and I went across the street to First Methodist Church. That's where my grandparents and my little sister and I would go to church on Sunday. And I sat on the steps, and I opened the first book, which was Lorna Doone, and my journey truly began. Now, not long afterward, now remember, this is a lot going on in 1 year of my life. While I was still 10 years old, I wanted to get right to it. I didn't want to waste any time, so I wrote my own book. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Jane Austen's History of England, but I think it's about 10 pages. So it's about the length of Jane Austen's History of England. And in it, as Julie was telling you earlier, I used Mr. Butler's famously shocking word. I thought, boy, this is new. You can do this in a book. I just want to do that. Now, I knew that if my grandmother were to see that, she would kill me. So I hid it. And my little sister found it. And here's what she said. She ran into the kitchen one morning. I remember it so clearly. She says, Mama, Mama, Janice wrote a book, and it's got damn in it. I want to tell you that my grandmother did not take this news lightly. And here's what she said. Go out there and bring me a switch and make it a little stinging switch. Do you know the difference between a heavy switch and a stinging switch? Well, I don't know about you, but in my family, we had to strip the leaves off it ourselves and present it ready to roll. Mama just gave a whipping all she had, and you know what? That was a good thing. It never hurt me any. But that's just one reason you won't find any cussing in any of the Mitford novels. Now, my sister Brenda is here tonight. And Brenda, would you stand and let us give you a hand for the part you played in my literary career? I love my sister. She edited the Mitford Bedside Companion. We worked on that thing for 3 years, and I mean, she was the best possible editor. She understands my work. She's absolutely, every detail was important to her. And so just to think that two sisters at our age and stage in life can work together on such, to me, an important project. It was wonderful. So, 9 Mitford novels and no cussing. However, I have a confession to make to you. When Dooley Barlow appeared in At Home in Mitford, what I saw was a very tough kid with some very rough language. Now, I'd never written a book before. This was my first book. I didn't know exactly what to do. I thought, well, you know, I'm just committed to not having any bad words in my books. But honest to Pete, I ought to let him say at least one bad word because it would, establish his character. So what did I pick but the S word? I'm sorry, I apologize, but so it was the S word. And then, of course, and my publisher was at that time a small Christian publisher, and the editor said, no way. This word has got to go. I said, you are so right. I should never have put that word in there. But guess what? Somebody at the editorial level forgot to delete it, and 5,000 copies of At Home in Mitford sailed out into the bookstores with that word on page 118. Well, the complaints started rolling in, and the head of marketing called in the sales force and said, take your magic markers, get out there and purge that word. In bookstores everywhere, the heavy black censorial mark obliterated that word on page 118. Now, the salespeople endured this with great dignity. You know, salespeople can really take a lot. But after the dust settled, they had T-shirts printed. And the shirt said, page 118 happens. Don't you just love salespeople? I'll tell you why I drink a good bit of water. This started some years ago when I first started writing the series. And I thought, that's one of the symptoms of diabetes. Lord help, I hope I don't have diabetes. I better go research that. Did all this research, went to the doctor, spent about $400 on blood testing. He said, you don't have diabetes. So great, I just gave it to Father Tim. I said, I've done all this research on diabetes. I am not going to waste it. Well, as many of you know, and by the way, I'm so happy you're here tonight. I personally don't go out much at night, and I was trying to think, who would I go out at night to see? Of course, I'd have to drive 30 minutes to get to town with deer jumping across the road, And I just could hardly come up with anybody. And so, I just want to thank you a lot for being here. That's great. But as you know, the 9 novels of the Mitford series have been a real hit. And For the first time in years, a whole legion of readers can open the cover of a book and find refuge and laughter and decency and goodness and comfort. Indeed, in the Mitford books, readers everywhere can find themselves. You know these people. We are these people. So, with all of that going for the series, why did I decide to end it? And the answer is there was just nothing more really to tell. It was finished. But what wasn't finished was my relationship with my main character, Father Timothy Kavanaugh. Now, I really like him a lot. In the beginning, I did not like him very much. Isn't that interesting that I would write a whole book about somebody and then another one about somebody that didn't even particularly interest me? I'll tell you what the magic was. When he married Cynthia, he just got to be more fun. Agatha Christie wrote 40 novels about Hercule Poirot, and she admitted freely that she didn't like him. Anyway, so I have grown to love Father Tim for lots of reasons. He's easy to be with. We have a lot of things in common. He likes to grow roses, although I don't grow roses. I've often dreamed that I would like to do it. He cooks, he loves the old poets, he likes Mozart, and, he's just a great guy, very sensitive. And, however, if I was going to push ahead with this character, we'd have to chart new and even frightening territory. That much I knew. We would have to go deeper, much deeper, and we would have to face his demons. As my Mitford readers know, one of his greatest demons is his conflict with his father. All those years of wondering what happened. He never could figure it out. And why had the conflict been so bitter? And what happened to Tommy Knowles, his boyhood friend and blood brother? Somebody, how you cut your finger and you push your fingers together and you're blood brothers. That's important. And what became of Peggy, who was like a second mother to him? Why did she leave without even saying goodbye, just vanished? He never really quite got over it. For a long time, he was very, very sad. He grieved. And then for a long time, he was very, very angry. And what was the truth behind that lawsuit that drove the Kavanaugh family even further apart? Decades of not knowing, decades of wondering. So after 38 years and change, as he likes to say, he learns the truth. He goes home to Holly Springs. And this trip will change his life forever. Remember Peggy Kramer? We have never seen her in a Mitford book. We've never met her, but she's referred to. They were engaged during his first year of seminary against the better judgment of his family and even of himself. I'll read to you. She sat on the garden bench with her legs crossed, smoking. The pell-mell bore a crimson band of lipstick, which he knew to be cherries in the snow. He liked seeing his great-grandmother's ring on her finger. It made him feel more confident about the future. Several weeks before the night at the Peabody, on a break from his first year in seminary, Nanny had offered him her mother's platinum 2-carat engagement ring. "Do you love her?" she had asked. "Yes, ma'am." He had felt miserable saying it because he wasn't absolutely certain. "Her father is a very rich man. I'm sure her family will approve of Mother's lovely old ring." "Are you sure you want to do this, Nanny?" "Well, of course I'm sure. And heaven forbid, if things don't work out, she'll give it back to you and no harm done." She had handed him the ring in its original box from the Jackson jeweler, saying, "Be careful, dear child, but not afraid." He hadn't known and didn't ask why she had said that. Peggy gave him a chilling look. Why are you going to that old seminary anyway? Because. Because why? He had never understood it himself, not completely. Because I have to. Why do you have to? Because he wanted to do something for God for a change, not for himself. Because he knew he'd never make it as a lawyer. Because loving poetry and literature and being pretty good at track and excelling academically wouldn't cut it as a profession. Because he believed it might please his Father and even reveal to Matthew Kavanaugh some truth that would free him from the cold anguish he suffered and caused others to suffer. And finally, because nothing else promised the ineffable mystery and joy that he hoped, that he prayed would be his if he placed himself in God's service. He felt miserable answering her question. I just have to. She wanted answers, he wanted answers. There were no answers. She was jiggling her right foot, something she did when she was sour and impatient. Daddy says the cotton business is not dead or dying. There's still plenty of money to make in the cotton business if you know what you're doing. Besides, Daddy is diversifying, which is what smart people learn to do in hard times. He paced the brick path by the bench. He had heard this before. In a while, she said, "You sure could kiss me." She was staring at the garden wall, avoiding his gaze. Why? She turned to him, incensed. "I can't believe you said that. I know boys who would never ask such a stupid question. Why?" He asked why all the time. He couldn't help himself, but he had spoken too soon. He was nuts to pass up kissing Peggy Kramer, who was beautiful, who was actually wonderful to kiss. But she was like nettles, and he drew back. So there you'll have some understanding. This is a flashback he's having while he is actually sitting in her parlor having tea and chocolate cake, with Cynthia's permission, I might say. And I also wanted to read you one of the first places Father Tim went. Well, actually, one of the first places he went was the cemetery. We went to a beautiful cemetery today. Is it Oakwood? Yes, and saw Margaret Mitchell's resting place. Very, very beautiful. What a gorgeous cemetery. Well, there are cemeteries like that all over the South and probably all over the North and the Midwest, too. I just have not been in them in other places. There's a beautiful cemetery in Holly Springs where this book is set, one in Memphis where also several scenes in this book are set. But yours is quite outstanding, I must say, and huge, huge. So I'm glad I went. Anyway, that's one of the first places he went, and he found out something there. My goodness. And then he went to his old hangouts, Booker's Hardware, where he worked as a kid. 3 summers he sat up on that stool, rang the cash register, heard his first dirty joke, smoked his first cigarette. I mean, Booker's made a big impression in his life. Then he went to Tyson's Drug. I mean, these are real places, still existing. And people, went to those places myself. I went down to Holly Springs and spent a week doing research and talking to people and received the most lovely, lovely hospitality. You know, down there, we're in the Deep South too, aren't we, come to think of it? Georgia is the Deep South. And what I find is that the Deep South is just a little sweeter than the regular South, where I'm from. And, of course, he wanted to go back to his home place, as we would all want to do. Let me say here that having waited 38 years plus change to go back to his roots, it's a long time. And he didn't go back because he was afraid of the answers. He was afraid of what he was going to find out. But he went back out to Whitefield, which was where he was raised. He was born in town in Holly Springs, and he rode home as a baby, 4 weeks old, in the back seat of that Buick town car with the white sidewall tires in Peggy's arms. So he goes back to Whitefield. He has no idea what to expect. Maybe it's covered over by kudzu for all he knows. Let me tell you, Mississippi has got some kudzu. But it wasn't. It looked more beautiful than ever, much more beautiful than he could remember it. Somebody was in there working on it, completely restoring it. It's a lovely house. And two men, a white man named T, stands for Theophilus, a black man named Ray, who's a great cook. Well, as it turns out, these two men take him in. And he's got Barnabas with him, not just everybody would take you in if you've got Barnabas with you. This is, as you may know, his dog as big as a sofa. And so he spends several nights there with T and Ray, who are showing him the loveliest hospitality. It's the kind of hospitality he remembers from his boyhood, that deep Southern hospitality. They made him feel like family. So he and T are sitting out. He's rocking in the rocking chair. You know how it'll squeak, squawk, squeak, squawk. T and Ray got it out of a dumpster. And the cicadas are singing, and the tree frogs, it's a lovely symphony out there. In Georgia, do you say cicada or cicada? Cicada? Oh, I got to quit saying cicada. Because I certainly say tomato, I can tell you that. So, T has told him a little bit about his father, and he said earlier he was bad to drink, bad to fight, and hell to live with, but no use going on about it. His father Tim says, your father, is he still living? Well, if he is, he's in a ditch somewhere. Your mother? Took off when I was 10. How about your old man? Deceased. He was a hard man, a broken man. Broke breeds broke, said T. Try saying that after a couple shooters of Jack Daniels. Thank God I never messed with alcohol, he said. Not much, anyway. I got dog drunk one night before a big track meet at Albany and woke up in a pool of vomit. Couldn't run, could barely walk. I was completely dysfunctional and completely humiliated. Truth is, I didn't have all the fun some people claim to have, or if I did, I couldn't remember it. Sick and sorry, that was me. Right then, I knew one thing for sure. Alcohol wouldn't be my downfall. There might be a downfall in the cards, but it wouldn't be booze. I broke myself of booze. Wow, tough to get sober without help. Tough to get sober with help, said T. Probably ought to quit smoking, too, like Ray did a while back. Man, quit drinking, quit smoking, quit messing with women. I might as well lay down and die. Never expected to end up some old dude out in the sticks playing gin rummy and watching the History Channel. T took a drag off the cigarette and exhaled. So tell me something. Going back to being broke, how come you ain't broke? I am broke. What I've found in being a priest is that we're all broken. Fallen is perhaps a more scriptural concept, but usually what falls gets broken, so it's all the same. The upside is he promises we'll be made whole in heaven. Till then, we keep seeking him, we keep trusting him, keep letting him have his way with us. That's our job. Yeah, fine, but what's his job? To keep forgiving us and keep loving us. I don't know about religion. It don't make sense to me. Well, too complicated, that's why. I say forget religion. What it's about, T, is the two of you, just you and him. Nothing more, nothing less. A lot of people wonder why they were born. I believe what Scripture says, that he made us for his pleasure. You might say he made us because he wants somebody around, somebody like you and somebody like me. Pretty amazing that he'd want me around, I can tell you that. T leaned his head against the back of the chair. Too much for me, the whole deal of living. Well, I'm with you on that. Even with God in the picture, I still go through some hard stuff, and always will. But he's in it with me, and that makes all the difference. I guess the bottom line is it's totally, fatally about surrender. That's what it takes. Throwing out your agenda and trusting His. I was in my 40s before I really got it. I was a priest before I got it. So how'd you get it? Well, one night I came to the end of myself. I hit a wall and I couldn't go over it or under it or around it or through it. Dead end. I've been reading a good deal, trying to figure it out. I thought a lot about something a young French mathematician said. He said, "Let us weigh the gain and the loss, wagering that God is. Consider these alternatives. If you win all. If you lose nothing. Don't hesitate then to wager that He is." I'd been wagering a little here, a little there. That night, I wagered everything. I prayed a prayer that went something like this. Thank you, God, for loving me and for sending your Son to die for my sins. I sincerely repent of my sins and turn my entire life over to you. That's it. That's it. Thank you. I've really fallen in love with the characters in Holly Springs. T and Ray, two guys just trying to make a living, remodeling this house for T's brother, who's an attorney in Memphis. I've loved all of my characters. Every single character I've ever written, I've loved, including Edith Mallory. But you know, I didn't know what I was going to do with her. Here we're coming to the end of this 9-book series. What am I going to do with Edith Mallory? And until I learned to love her, I didn't know what to do with her. And then when I learned to love her, I let a ceiling fall on her head. But it took a ceiling for Edith Mallory. And I was quite surprised to see how she handled. You see, there are certain things I know as the author, there are certain things, but there are certain things I don't know till it happens. And look, he was pushing her up the street in a wheelchair in Mitford. And she was stopping people on the street to say with her dysfunctional language, God is good. I loved Buck Leeper. Buck Leeper appeared in the second novel, and I didn't know what to do with him. Let me tell you, I did not know. Okay, I'm a woman who has decided not to have any cussing in her books. He cusses like a sailor. He is the ultimately profane man. Muddy boots, hard hat, 2/5 of vodka, and just sucking up unfiltered cigarettes, half killing himself. What am I going to do with Buck Leeper? Well, hit delete maybe? I thought. No, I'm going to see what God does with Buck Leeper. I liked him so much, and I was so concerned for him and the agony that he carried with him for having been the cause of his little brother's death. I was so concerned for him, I found myself praying for Buck Leeper. That is absolute evidence that I was working too hard. My characters have meant so much to me. They just have meant so much. When Miss Sadie died in, I think, the 4th book, it just broke my heart. I just bawled my head off for about 3 days. People said, well, you're the author. Why did you let her die? It's like, well, it was her time. It just was. You know, there's a sense of timing, as in life, in fiction, too. And that's why I loved writing A Common Life, because it brought Miss Sadie back. Well, anyway. The only real regret I have in giving up the Mitford series and going on to a new series is that I've lost Uncle Billy and his great jokes. And, I thought, well, I'm going out on a book tour, and I've got to talk about Home to Holly Springs, and I love talking about it, but I just can't tell any of his jokes. And then I thought, wait a minute, you can tell his jokes if you want to. So I'm just going to tell you some Uncle Billy jokes. Just to thank you for coming out tonight. And I'll tell them in the North Carolina mountain dialect that I was raised on and just love. He said, well, there's a man a-going around, don't you know, taking the census. Come to this house and knocked on the door, and a woman come to the door, and he says, how many young'uns you got, and what are their ages? She said, well, let's see, we got Willie and Billy, they're 12, and we got Danny and Tanny, they're 14, and we got Jimmy and Winnie, She says, hold on, do you mean you got twins every time? She says, law, no, there's hundreds of times we didn't get nothing. You're just like me. It doesn't take much for you, does it? Well, there was an old man and an old woman sitting out on the porch, don't you know? And she said, you know what I'd like to have? He said, what's that? She says, there's a big old bowl of vanilla ice cream with chocolate sauce and nuts on top. He said, well, Dad, Jing, that sounds good. I'll just go down the store and get us some. She says, well, you better write it down or you'll forget it. He says, I ain't going to forget it. Went down to the store, come back a good bit later, had a paper sack, handed it over to her. She looked in there. There's 2 ham sandwiches. She took the top off one and said, see there, dadgummit, I knowed you'd forget. I wanted mustard on mine. Well, you all are a great audience, I have to tell you. I just believe this might be the most relaxed I've ever been within the audience. I just worry and fret and make notes and get up in the middle of the night and write them down and just, I was coming to the Carter Center and everything, and I'm just having the best time in the whole world. And I do want to have some time for questions, because when I take questions, there's usually a good bit of, conversation that ensues. And so I think Tony is going to show you where the microphones are. I believe that's what we're going to do.
Why don't we do about 20 minutes or so, because we want to have time for you all to meet Jan. We have microphones over here and over here. If you'll just line up behind the microphones. One request, please keep your questions short, because we want to get as many as possible. So if you want to just start lining up on either side, and we'll just go back and forth. In fact, this... You won't be seen, but your voice will be heard, okay? So let's start right over here.
Good. I just love it when an audience isn't shy. Yes, ma'am.
Miss Karon, I was wondering, what did you write before the Mitford series?
What did I write before the Mitford series?
Yes, ma'am.
Advertising. For about 100 years.
Advertising, what?
Advertising for what products?
Yes, ma'am.
Piedmont Airlines before it was U.S. Airways, 2 or 3 cruise lines, Norwegian Cruise Line for one. Then back in the really old days, I wrote for Nice Sausage. And Liver Mush. Yes, ma'am.
You said that you were raised Methodist. I wonder what made you choose to write about an Episcopal priest.
I was raised Methodist, actually. What caused me to write about an Episcopal priest? Well, I just thought it was safer. The Baptists had been in a lot of trouble. And now look who's in trouble. I don't know. That's just the way he came to me, and I'll get right to you, but I was lying in bed one night desperately trying to figure out what I was going to write about. I'd moved to the mountains of North Carolina, given up advertising and all my fallbacks, and I found I didn't have anything to say, and really devastated by this. And then one night lying in bed, I had this mental image of a short, balding, overweight man walking down a village street. I knew he was a priest because he had a collar on, and that's sort of how that happened. And then, he was sort of boring, really. But I kept writing because I was enthralled by it. And I took it to Jerry Burns, the newspaper editor at the Blowing Rocket in Blowing Rock, where I lived. And I said, Jerry, what do you think I've got here? And he read it, and he confessed that he didn't really know what I had there, but he thought he'd sure like to run it in the paper every week because it filled up a lot of space. And since nothing ever happens in a small town, thank God, he just loved every week I was giving him that. And first thing you know, I had a book. So that's how I wrote about an Episcopal priest. Yes, ma'am?
I was just wondering if you could tell us any of Kenny's story.
I couldn't hear that.
I was wondering if you could tell us any of Kenny's story. I've always wondered where he was all during the time. Dooley's brother.
Oh, the Kenny store.
Yes.
I thought you said the candy store.
Oh,
I'm
no.
thinking, did I write that? No. I'm going to tell a little story, then I'm going to come back to that, but you're going to have to remind me of the question. I recently learned in a hearing test that I'm losing some hearing. It can be genetic. Did you know that? You can get it. It comes down through the family line, or there are lots of other reasons. But anyway, so it's very inconvenient when someone asks a question and I can't really hear it. But that's okay. I'm having fun with it. Because my nephew asked me the other day, he said, Aunt Jan, may I use your hammer? And I said, of course, dear, and I just put film in it. I mean, if you're not a little hard of hearing, you're just not going to have that much fun. That's not what there is to it. Now, my mother is worse than I am, way worse. She has a little dog, a little Maltese dog, and it had a stroke recently, but it's fine. But this little dog had a stroke, and Mother was so worried about it. And she met somebody in the hall who knows me and loves my work, and this woman said, Wanda, how's your daughter? Mother said, oh, honey, her little tongue's hanging out. And one of her eyes won't close. But she still wags her tail. People say, where do you get your characters? And I ought to say, well, it's right out of my own family, really. You ask about Kenny. You will find out more about Kenny in this book, Home to Holly Springs. As most of you know, now all the lost and thrown away Barlow children have been brought back together. Father Tim has made this a mission, and it's not altogether to be attributed to him, but he certainly has worked hard and prayed hard, and so have a lot of other people, for those children to be reunited. And if you want to find out more, do read the Father Tim novels. Now, we will not be in Mitford ever again. It's just finished. It's done. But Father Tim is going to travel, and he does have a cell phone and actually knows how to use it. And so he and Dooley will talk quite a lot, and you'll find out more. I'm not going to leave you hanging. By the way, I hope that you are not among those who want me to write until I'm 100 years old about Dooley getting married to Lace. See, I knew there was at least one here. Dooley marries Lace, and then I write about all of their children and grandchildren. Yes, ma'am.
I consider Father Tim to be the perfect clergyman. I was just wondering if you had, I know he's not based on a real person, but were there any real-life people that were the inspiration for Father Tim?
Any real-life people who were an inspiration for Father Tim?
No. I wish that I knew someone. But here's what I believe. I really believe that there are a few men like him. Not many, A few. I believe that.
We'll talk.
The first photograph I saw of you perhaps was in a magazine. It may have been on your website, but I thought, there's Cynthia. You look like Cynthia, I think, would look. But there was a lovely story about you, I believe it's in Southern Lady, where you gave a white tea at your home.
I can't hear you.
Oh, a white tea
A white
at your
tea.
home.
Yes,
A
yes,
beautiful
I did.
story, lovely pictures. I believe, is that the same jewelry you wore at the white tea?
Same jewelry?
It is. That's amazing. What a cute question. I've never had that question before.
As an ordained United Methodist minister, I'm glad to know you are a minister, you were raised as Methodist. But my question is, I find it so interesting and rewarding that your treatment of religious rites, their practices, their theology is so on target and so well researched. Where did you go, and did it come naturally, or were they resources that you pulled from?
Thank you for that question. That is a wonderful question. Where do I pull from? Well, I pull a lot from prayer. These books are bathed in prayer. People say, I just love your books, I just love your characters, I just love that. But you know what I think people really love in my books? I think there is a sense of the Holy Spirit. There is a sense of His love for us. I was saved at the age of 42. I'm now 70, to give you some perspective of how long I have been walking with Him. I had just come, as Father Tim said, I had just come to the end of myself. There was just nothing. There was nowhere to go anymore. Pascal said there is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of everyone. And the only way to fill it is with God. It can't be filled by any created thing. So I had felt that vacuum. Didn't know what to call it or how to put words to it or how to define it, but I had felt the awesome emptiness of that vacuum all of my life. And I'd been very rebellious and unrepentant all of my life until that time. And so I just threw up my hands and went to my knees and just said, Lord, I just can't do this anymore. I don't even know I just can't do it. I'm just pretty much like the prayer that Father Tim quoted to T. I'm just turning it all over to you. In other words, it was an act of surrender. That's the hard part. To think about giving up all we've worked for, all that we think we have accomplished, all that we think we are, just giving it to Him, this God we can't even see. But that's what it took for me. And so that's where I get that sense that I believe you're speaking about is for just the actual hard text of Scripture. Well, I just go, where everybody can find it and go to the God's Word. And again, I pray, what am I going to say this time? How is this scene going to work? What am I going to do this morning? I don't want to write. I don't feel like writing. And I just sit down and I just wait, and then something wonderful happens. Not every time, but a lot. And then, once again, I'm working on one of God's books, and may it ever be so. Yes, ma'am.
I'm an English teacher, and I would love for my students to begin reading your books. But my question is, I have to get them started with television or a movie or something along that lines to get their interest. Is anything like that in the works or in the plans to set any of your books into movies or television series?
Any effort to get your books into movies, television?
A lot of effort, but it's all so half-hearted that I'm not interested. Thank you for that question. 10 years people have been knocking on the door, and some interesting names. Denise DeNovi, for one, who is a Christian and has great credentials in Hollywood. She's a very bright woman. She did the most recent Little Women. She filmed Message in a Bottle and James and the Giant Peach and so forth. She's been in love with Mitford for a long, long time. We'll see how that works out. Michael Landon Jr. is currently very interested. We'll see how that works out. A very intriguing fact. I live in an 1816 house in Central Virginia, and some years ago, a man named Roger McBride lived in that house. Michael Landon Sr. signed the movie contract with Roger McBride, or the television contract with Roger McBride. Roger McBride sold the rights to Michael Landon Sr. So his son, Junior, didn't even know that when he was interested in Mitford that we had the tie of that house. So we'll see. I'm going to protect that work just like an old mad wet hen. I'm not going to let anything crazy happen. And I thank you so much. And let me just take the time to thank you for being Mitford fans. That means a lot to me. When I began writing, I thought I might be writing into a vacuum. I suppose there might be a small vein of people like myself who would enjoy reading these books. It was the straw that broke the camel's back for me was going to my little hometown Blowing Rock volunteer library, taking a bestseller off the shelf, pretty eager to read it, and finding explicit sex right on the first page and the worst language you wouldn't believe. I would just say, I can't do this anymore. I'm just going to write a book that I want to read. And of course, I might have thought, well, but nobody else is going to want to read it. But look, you did, and I thank you for that. Thank you.
For my birthday this year, my mom made me the orange marmalade cake, and it was probably the best cake that I've ever had. Have you ever tasted it?
The cake?
Yes, the orange marmalade cake.
Have you ever tasted one?
I had some today. I could just live my life having some of that cake every day. That is, I'm not a big chocolate fan. I mean, I know that most of you here are, and that's very hard to understand, but I was never raised on chocolate. We weren't allowed to have it. That cake is the best cake I ever put in my mouth. And it is so hard to make that I pay other people to do it. I said, what would you bake this cake for? And she said, oh, well, how about $15? I said, I'll give you $25. Thank you. That's a great question.
Do you know how many books are going to be in the new series?
How many books will be in your new series, The Father Tim?
I really don't know. I know the next one will be set in Ireland, and it's called Party of Four. Father Tim and Cynthia go to Ireland. It opens on a train, and it closes on a train. That much I know, and that's about all I know. Iris Murdoch, the very famous author, now deceased, wrote a 40-page outline every time she prepared to write a novel. And I couldn't do that if my life depended on it. I would immediately take some dog leg from it. I just wouldn't stick to it. I just want to be surprised. I'm in it for the ride, like you all are. In fact, what I want more than anything to do, I've just recently decided this. I found a quote by Kurt Vonnegut. I think it's the best quote for what we as authors should try to do. What we should try to do is be a good date for the reader.
I like that.
Thank you.
Have you guys had fun tonight?
Thank you.